So I'm going to go ahead and angle this, and I'm a lefty. So I'm going to angle this off to the side, and I'm going to pull this around over here. And I need to subdivide this guy up because it's great as an image plane, but the problem is that whatever my active material is, oh, totally like hanging a mood board on my wall. But whatever my active material is, that's what's going to be shading this plane, right? So I want this to be Skin Shade 4. Skin Shade 4 is great for displaying color. It pumps out the diffuse color on a surface better than anything else without any sort of shading getting in the way. So I'm going to convert this over to polypaint, subdivide up. Let's undock that render palette. And did I lose my tool palette? I most certainly did. I undocked it. All right. And let's go up to, let's go to 1,000,000. Go to polypaint and say polypaint from texture. There we go. Now it's baked into polypaint. I'm going to go to Skin Shade 4. Where are we? Skin Shade 4. And I want to go back into draw mode, activate material channel, color, fill object. All right, I'm ready to sculpt now, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a quick save. Hit the 9 key, just in case. Let's turn off that hideous grid. And you know, there's a couple different ways you could start. You could start with a Z-sphere. You could start with a sphere. You could start with a head and then move into a Z-sphere. It can all be rolled together. Whatever works best for you. How many of you guys, just out of curiosity, is everybody, I mean, this is sort of an intermediate course, so I want to make sure that, you know, everybody's, that I'm not leaving anybody behind. So if there's something that you're not familiar with, I'm just going to jump into it, and if you're not familiar with it, please stop me and ask me. Don't be afraid to ask me to go, can you explain that a little bit further, right? But for this guy, I think I'm going to want to start just with the head. And right now, we got a polysphere up here. I'm just going to go ahead and convert that over to Dynamesh. Common mistake when you have a sphere like this with subdivisions. And actually, did I just... No, okay, I'm good. Never mind. I have 3 subdivisions. I was on the plane, not on the sphere. My apologies. So common mistake with Dynamesh, when you have subdivisions, a lot of newer users will go ahead and click on yes whenever there's a pop-up. Make sure that you say no, because otherwise it's going to freeze subdivision levels, and it's going to be a technical snafu that's might hang you up later on. So I'm going to start with the head, which is usually not where I start. I usually try and focus just on silhouette, but I think the head is such a large component of what I mean, this head is almost all this guy has, right? I mean, his body is beautiful, but I think the shape of his head is leading into the body, and that's what I'm seeing. So also that double click always upsets me, so let's go to preference and interface. Subpalette pop-up, where is it? Click, nope. There we go, enable right-click pop-up. Let's turn that off. All right. I tend to be a hunter and pecker inside the preference palette. So let's start. Dynamesh 128, that's 43,000 polys. That's way too high. Let's go ahead and drop this down to 32. I want a speed mesh. There we go. All right, snake hook is my preferred starter. And it looks like my left and right bracket keys have died. So I'll use this and turn off that dynamic. Part of the reason why, and I mean, I hope you guys don't mind me sharing with you how I work in ZBrush. I know you probably want me to get sculpting this creature out, but at the beginning of a sculpt, you want to start with a really low resolution, of course, because it's easier to move those faces around. You don't want to get hung up in a high resolution mesh. I see a lot of traditional sculptors that go into ZBrush. They like to up that resolution on Dynamesh because it's, that's very much, it feels more comfortable working on a high resolution mesh. But I like to take advantage of the fact that the mesh inside of ZBrush is something that's completely dynamic. You're not tied to a mesh. I mean, that was 3.5, you were tied to a mesh. ZBrush 3.5, you were tied to a mesh. ZBrush 4 broke that, right? And all the other things that followed that, whether it was QRemesher and ZRemesher in conjunction with Dynamesh, the mesh is a dynamic object in ZBrush, and you just take advantage of that to the fullest. So, next thing, that dynamic draw size, which is great when you're doing mechanical stuff. It's great for doing detail work, deco, using insert mesh brushes, insert mesh curve mode brushes. That dynamic, it's wonderful. And now when you're using the Z modeler, it's wonderful. How many of you guys have upgraded to 4R7? Are we working on 4R6, 4R7? Awesome. It's a wonderful release. I'll be putting a Z modeler video out pretty soon. Ryan has a great one out. Joseph Druss has put some great stuff out on Z Classroom for sort of nuts and bolts of how to use those features. But I've been working on a ship that I started in the beta. I did a spider tank. It's my second hard surface piece, and it's really not my forte, it's not hard surface, but I did it because I wanted to see how well these features really made it easier to do hard surface quickly. Because I can do hard surface, it's just I'm slower in hard surface. So let me start sculpting. But yeah, I mean, if you guys have any questions about 4R7, and yeah, 64-bit is awesome. Being able to subdivide up to 80 million polys per tool or per subtool is awesome. I got up to 320 million polys on, I was doing a crash test, 320 million polys on one project, and it moved. I was surprised. Yeah, right? That's exactly my expression, is that wide eyes, just, oh my gosh, 320 million polys on one project. So this draw size, back to this, great for mechanical stuff. In my opinion, horrible for organic stuff. And here's the reason why. So if I have that on, and you know what, I'm going to go ahead and fix this shortcut here. So let's go to miscellaneous. There we have our brush size. Holding down Control, I'm going to reset the hotkeys for my brush size. Control and Alt tap here, and then hit the left bracket. There we go. Going OK. Control Alt here, and right bracket. Oh, try that one more time. So odd. That's fine. I'll just use the slider. I'm not going to fidget with it right now. So use the slider. So the reason why I don't like the dynamic draw size when I'm trying to bust out the silhouette, if the brush size is remaining proportional to the surface of the mesh, that means I can't do this. And that means I'm constantly hitting the size key, or I'm hitting my bracket keys, right, to change my brush size. So I want to just zoom in and zoom out, right, which makes sense. If I'm working on smaller detail and I want a smaller brush size, I'm going to zoom in. If I want to work on silhouette, I want a larger brush size, and I'm going to zoom out. So there you have it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So snake hook. For those of you who might use MoveBrush, well, I think it's kind of the words out. Snake hook is the probably best starter brush when you're trying to build silhouette. And I'm kind of already starting to see my creature in here. And with salamander, it doesn't really take much to sell it. I'm a big fan of wattles underneath between the neck. Let's go ahead and remesh. And when you're sculpting, it helps it helps to constantly be moving. I always try and think about that, like, am I really seeing it from all angles? Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And that's, the paranoid painter in me that's going, okay, I'm going to get tricked. Here we go. Let's pull that out. Let's remesh, smooth down. And I'm going to start with what I think will be good eye placement. Kind of revert back to some of this and see what's going on here. Look up in here and get maybe some of this later on, the end game. We start getting into like tertiary forms, secondary forms. And well, I think that's good. Actually, let me try and mix it up. So, I want this to be a little bit of an oddball. So I'm going to start having the eyes really affecting the shape of the head. I don't want him to feel too scary because he's what I like to call a nooblodon, right? He's your noob fodder. Want tiny little beady eyes, even though we have the head being super affected by the eye area. And I just want to get a rough idea of what it's going to look like. I capture the silhouette, find out where the eyes are going to sit, and then I'm going to move on to the body, and then I'll come back and elaborate on this later on. So I just want really just something very, very rough. And if I really need some guidance as far as what to do here, like I'm just not feeling it, then I will go back to nature and start taking a look at some bones. We'll pull some reference from there. All right, so there's my head. Now, let's go ahead and append in a Z-sphere. And Morimander, head, and body, Z-sphere. Let's find out where our sphere is sitting. There we are. Let's activate symmetry, hit the X key. Let's pull this back. And you know what? Let's try the transparency to pull that back. There we go. Sit it right at the neck for now, just so we know where it's at. One thing that always gets me in the default preferences for ZBrush, and I don't know, I never thought to ask why it was set this way, but if you go to the Draw palette, the default angle of view for perspective distortion is 90. This is, for me, this is horrible to work from. Right? It feels so unnatural, especially as I rotate around and my creature is fish-eyeing out at me. I like to drop this down to around 35. That will set up my perspective distortion somewhere along the lines of a 50mm camera lens, which is how our eyes naturally see things, or the closest that our eyes naturally see things. All right, so on to the body. Now, approaching the body, I'm looking at sort of what is it that's really, I mean, this was the image that really grabbed me, right? So my brain, what is it about that image that grabbed me? And it's sort of that coiling, and if you think of, Monsters Inc., right? It's the same sort of, it has that same vibe, right? So I'm going to pull something from that, not ripping off Monsters, Inc.